Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and I've also been a teacher and even taught maths for a number of years. So, when a senior politician, not least the Prime Minister, announces a policy related to maths teaching, of course, I'm going to be particularly interested. But Sunak's recent policy statement that everyone should study maths until the age of 18 is actually a classic case of a policy from the Tory government. It's something that they've promised in the past and not delivered. It's something that doesn't mean what you might think it means. It's something that they can't actually deliver in any serious way. And it's something that isn't top of the public's agenda right now anyway. It is, from that point of view, a very typical Tory policy. And that's what I'm going to discuss. I am going to discuss the policy in particular, but how it's like every other policy we're getting at the moment. Pointless and impotent. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, Rishi Sunak, basically last week, he was trying to set out his stall. He didn't really say much about what his government were going to do when he first became Prime Minister. If we were to be charitable, we could say that, oh yeah, of course, he absolutely had a vision, but it wasn't the right time. He was having to clear up the mess left by his short-lived predecessor, Liz Truss, and that the public would be much less interested in a grand vision for the future when the ship of state was currently on fire. So the new year brings another opportunity to present his ideas such as they are. One of the policy aims he announced was that studying some form of maths until the age of 18 would be compulsory. Now, this sounds like a grand ambition. Maths may not be a lot of people's favourite subject, but it is stunningly useful in all walks of life. I would certainly not object to people in society having a better understanding of maths. Apart from anything else, it would make it harder for the Tories to con people with dodgy statistics. However, Sunak is not talking about giving people a better understanding of maths, is he? Isn't he? But wouldn't studying maths for longer give people a better understanding? No, or at least not necessarily. The devil is in the detail. Some form of maths, he said. Some form of maths. What does that mean? It could mean a number of things. What it actually means will determine whether it's a good policy or not. For example, right now, people between the ages of 16 and 18 who study maths in this country tend to fall into one of three categories. The first is what would spring to mind immediately if you say studying maths between 16 and 18. That is studying advanced level maths, A-level maths, or higher in Scotland, because they either really like it or they want a career in a STEM area, science, technology, engineering, or maths. The second type would be those who are studying a different programme, but one for which numerical skills are incredibly useful and it can incorporate a maths unit. For example, my latter part of the teaching career, I was teaching a lot of applied science, but there were maths units in there as well. So the students studying that were studying maths above the level of GCSE, even though it wasn't specifically a maths course. There are other vocational courses where there'll be a maths unit or two in it as well. Then there's the third type, those who are resitting GCSE maths, or the equivalent, depending on where you are. The qualification examined when you're 15 to 16 years old. And it's this third one which arises as a result of not quite reaching the desired level at age 16. So you resit. Now, that's a failure of education. It will sometimes happen, of course it will. If a certain qualification is going to mean anything, inevitably there have to be some people who don't quite make the mark, at least on the first try. But it is still a measure of a failure of the education system for that individual who doesn't meet it. And this is the first thing that makes me wary. If you pull resources from schools, as of course the government are doing, then more people will not achieve that desired grade 4 at GCSE, say. That means more resitting when they go to college to study further. Well, that would be an increase in the number studying some form of maths between 16 and 18. But that's not a helpful thing for us. That's not a grand ambition, is it? Because that means that the maths that students have already been studying for 11 years, all of a sudden they need an extra 1 or 2 years on top of that. That's not teaching them a higher level of maths. That's not an economic benefit. That means spending longer, pumping more resources into teaching the same maths for a bit longer. It means that those students didn't get a good enough education beforehand for whatever reason. The next problem is one of capacity. So if a government that actually wanted to invest in education, which is not the current government, wanted to push people to actually study maths in a meaningful way, that is, studying maths at a higher level than the GCSE or equivalent level before entering the workplace, that would be great. Really great. I've met colleagues whose maths were so bad they couldn't do proper data analysis. I was a pissing teacher. You know, some teachers, before everyone gets moaning at me, some teachers from, say, a humanities background are not very good at maths, can't even work out a percentage. But it's worse in the private sector. There's people I've known who work for a private company, sometimes a big private company, have given me tales of woe of senior managers being so bad at maths, they've actually lost their company hundreds of thousands, if not sometimes millions of pounds because of their illiteracy. And this isn't even considered incompetence. They don't even get sacked. It's just considered one of those things. Oh, I seem to have dropped a bollock there. Oh, well, never mind. They still get to keep their job. They still get to make decisions that will cost the company more money when they drop another bollock later on. So absolutely, people entering the workplace in whatever capacity can always benefit from a higher understanding of maths, more maths skills, not necessarily longer maths learning, but more maths skills. But how would you do it? Not everybody's studying maths at school, where it is compulsory for everyone, even has a maths teacher. That is a teacher with a maths-based degree. You'll have a teacher who's teaching you maths, but are they a maths teacher? If you're lucky, you might have a teacher who at least understands the maths being taught very well, even if it's not there from their academic background. But even that isn't always the case. You know, there's the old joke about the teacher teaching an unfamiliar subject and making sure they can be 1 week ahead of the students. I don't think it's quite that bad, but it's not necessarily always far from the truth. If we don't have enough maths teachers who are actual maths experts right now, due partly to the poor pay compared to what you can get if you're good at maths elsewhere, how on earth is it possible to expand the level of maths teaching capacity? And there's a reason why I say this is like the typical Tory policy these days. How many times do they promise to make some improvements to something, but then there's no plan for it or there's no funding for it? For example, healthcare is always a keen one. They promised it would be easier to get an appointment with a GP. That goes back to David Cameron. Oh, we're going to make it easier. But there was no money for it ever. There was no plan for it. So it actually ended up getting harder. They're promising to reduce NHS waiting lists now. Okay, is there any money for this? No. Oh, all right. How are you going to achieve it then? I'm just going to tell doctors to, do surgeries. Right, okay. They promised 40 new hospitals. Oh, are you going to have money for 40 new hospitals? No. There was no money for 40 new hospitals. So guess what? We're not getting 40 new hospitals. It's like the Tories have never heard the phrase, you get what you pay for. Then there's the other issue with this policy. Sunak hasn't actually said what he means. If he were to give me the job of suggesting a detailed policy, part of my response actually would be to look at what I would call numeracy rather than the sort of more academic maths. For example, most people don't need A-level maths. You don't need to know how to do calculus or vectors or anything like that for most people. If you do, you'll probably have done A-level maths. It's really for people who are going to be studying a maths or engineering or similar course. Most of it is not applicable to people working for a business or people's domestic lives. What people need is a better understanding of arithmetic, basic algebra, statistics, and mensuration, shape, space, and measure. The core elements of GCSE maths, but in more detail to allow students to be able to apply it to more contexts. That's what I would do. Because the problem is when someone's learnt GCSEs, they can sort of do a bit of maths if it's presented to them almost like as a question, but they don't apply it to the real world. Something that allows people to understand it so they can apply it. That's what I would do. A numeracy course that improved people's skills in those 4 areas in a way that is relatable to the type of work people who are not STEM experts are going to carry out in the workplace, or what people would find useful in domestic life, managing finances, for example. It would still suffer from the problem of not enough maths teachers to cover the current requirements of schools and colleges, mind you. So more money would need to come in to raise the level of teachers' pay to make the career more attractive to those with the skills. Something that is basically kryptonite for Tories. But Sunak didn't actually explain what he meant by the policy, either at the time or with a detailed publication since. He could, for example, have written an article for a newspaper setting out how he sees this policy in practical terms. You can totally understand he announces it in a speech, but there's no detail there. Well, there often isn't a detail in a speech. Otherwise, it would go on for days. So, Keir Starmer's done that a few times. He's presented a speech with some general aims, what he sort of wants to do, not very detailed, but then he's written an article for some media outlet, some newspaper, which goes into more detail in one of the areas of interest. Rishi Sunak could do that. He'd have no problems getting it published. But he didn't. In fact, I don't think he ever has, like as Prime Minister at least. Why not? It is quite normal for politicians to write articles which set out some aspect of their policy ideas in more detail, than you could get away with in a speech. I don't think Sunak has ever done this, at least, as I say, as Prime Minister. And also, this makes it a typical Tory policy these days as well. What he's done is he's stated an aim, a very general aim, that people should study maths until 18. He hasn't said what that means. He hasn't said how it is to be achieved. He hasn't even said what he expects to achieve with it. It's a policy that would never feature in the top 10 of voters' concerns with government policy right now. You hand out a survey to adults in the UK and ask for their top 10 policy priorities. I can't imagine anyone putting down studying maths for 2 years longer as a compulsory subject. Now, a good policy isn't always one that the public prioritise, and sometimes the government will have to prioritise something that is a public priority but isn't necessarily a national priority. That's politics. But this doesn't come into either area. Like, for example, it could be a policy that yields an economic or social benefit that the public don't appreciate. I mean, you could say, well, better math skills, that's better for businesses that employ the workers so that fewer of the aforementioned bollocks are dropped by managers. So that would be an economic benefit. But only if people were being given better math skills, not just learning the same ones for longer. Better. But Sunak doesn't say that. He just says studying maths for longer, not to learn the maths better. It also could have social benefits. People who are good at maths are more likely to do well in their careers, be more employable. But again, if it's just a case of studying the same maths for longer because of education budget cuts, that's not actually helping. A pointless policy announcement because it doesn't state what it means, how it will be funded, what it will achieve, or when it will be achieved. So it sounds like a terrible policy, but it is exactly like all the other policies coming out of the government right now. What's happening right now is Rishi Sunak is just saying things. Oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do that, we're going to do that, we're going to do that. And he's just filling the airwaves with things he's going to do that all sound great, all sound like the sort of thing the government should be doing. But there is not a single plan behind any of them. And I don't just mean a plan that I don't think will work. There isn't actually anything published anywhere that says what they're going to do to achieve it. There isn't anything that even says in detail what they're going to do. There isn't any extra funding for any of these announcements. This is why it's very easy for Labour to label the Tories as out of ideas. Now, this is something, it has to be said, all parties of opposition will do with the party of government once they've been in power for a good number of years, let's say 10 or more years. They will always do that, regardless of whether it's true or not. But it just works well at the moment because objectively it is true of the current government. They are out of ideas because they cannot present a single policy for which they are able to publish a workable plan and budget. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.